Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, September 29th, 2022. Yes, correct. Okay. And, well, time to put an end to another breakfast with a show. How about that? Okay. So, yes, it is time once again, and once again scrambling at the last second. So, it's not great for show prep, quite honestly, this new school schedule. So I'm wondering if the Loudoun County Board of Education might change that. Otherwise, outrage, and I will bring the parents out screaming, and you'll have to listen to parents' voices, and and then suddenly I'll be governor of Virginia, and you'll never know what hit you. Okay. Anyway, I was surprised to note the other day. We didn't note it, actually. I noted it, and you noted it in your own life. We didn't note it together on the show that the other day here in, well, all across northern Virginia, but in particular also in Loudoun County, because that's where I was watching it, the high school students held a walkout protest, their favorite kind of protest, of course, a walkout protest from school that, in protest of what, you might ask? You might already know, actually, so you didn't ask me. A new furtherance of the old and still same policy from the Youngkin administration, implementing as regulation, I guess, across the public schools in Virginia, the mean-spirited and backwards, largely particularly anti-trans student policies. Basically, offhand, I couldn't even tell you exactly what it was because I just didn't pay that close attention to the story other than to note that, here comes the Youngkin administration again. Once again, doing the non-red fleece vesty thing of showing their true colors and placing restrictions on the abilities of teachers to accommodate trans students, to reassure them that they would be safe and not singled out for discrimination in the schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I just will note for the record, the really important part of this is that the students, regardless of what what their parents may have thought, and I really think the truth is they agree with their parents in a lot of this, and it was a distinct minority of parents who were vocal and angry and outspoken and making a show of things across Northern Virginia. But in the various Northern Virginia counties, and including Loudoun County, which I was told was the epicenter of a political earthquake that upended the, purple trend in Virginia, the bluing purple trend in Virginia toward more progressive policies across the board, that this was a reversal in all of that, and blah, 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 and a new political order would obtain. But as it turns out, the kids don't care very much who was elected governor. They want to see permissive policies continue. And so they walked out in protest. It's hard to measure the strength behind it, of course, because nothing kids like more than a protest that involves leaving school. But they didn't actually leave school. It's a very organized thing. The schools get out of the way for it because the understanding is that you will walk out in protest, make that visual statement, and then walk back in acknowledgement that you are here to further your education. And, it's a pretty mild protest by comparison to anything else, of course. And it's nice that the schools know to get out of the way and not try to butt heads with the kids. But I will point out that there was as a matter of fact, I'll have to dig it up. There's my first assignment for the day. There was a Fox News clip of the Fox News commentators were absolutely baffled that there could be this stuff going on. Don't these kids know that these restrictions are for their own protection from predators in their bathrooms, which isn't happening, or whatever else. Who knows what? The salvation of their souls, for all I know, is what they had in mind at the time. But yeah, the kids do know that this is supposed to be for their protection, but that it isn't. and that it is instead targeting their friends and classmates, and they aren't particularly happy about that, and they are worried about the health and safety and future development of their friends. Whoops, there's that thing that happened yesterday that I didn't prepare for. Remember when I told you, yesterday I cranked up the volume in order to play something through, what the hell was it? Through Firefox. And I said on the show yesterday, somebody remind me. So none of you reminded me. Thanks very much. Not your job, obviously, to turn down the volume, because otherwise tomorrow when Greg calls on Skype, which comes through the same volume control, there'll be thunderous news of his arrival in those chimes. And there was, not your fault, Greg. But at any rate, now I've got that fixed. Your voice shouldn't be booming from the sky. Anyway, I wanted to acknowledge that, the kids are doing okay out there. The kids are all right, as they used to say, until that became ancient history. And doing the right thing, and maybe even differing from their parents. But the Fox News people were baffled. Wait till they find out, I thought yesterday, about these kids and what their ages are, and how soon they'll become voters, and what they'll be doing with those votes in bluing purple Virginia. And of course, Youngkin won't have to face them for governor again, because he's term limited to one. But if he's thinking that he can turn it into a Senate or presidential run, I mean, I guess he can escape their wrath as a presidential candidate, possibly, since he can distribute it across the rest of the country. But if you're thinking about running for Senate, there are going to be a new generation of voters who remember this is the guy that targeted our friends and either drove them out of the state or drove them to who knows what. And we didn't like it then, and we don't like you now. So I just wanted to point that out. And then once again, the Loudoun County kids were participating in all this. There was no political earthquake in Loudoun County. Minds haven't changed here. It hasn't turned red. It's still pretty blue portion of a very blue part of the state. And just wanted to take the chance to remind you of that. Now I want to take a chance of reminding you that Greg Dworkin is here. You heard it, as I said, with his thunderous entrance, which just sounded normal to him. So that sounds fine with me. We can proceed as planned then. Good morning, Greg.
What? I can't hear you.
No, I blew your eardrums.
Turn up the volume.
Okay. I think I've got your, somewhere there has to be notes on what is this volume supposed to be. So we'll be playing around with that now. I think
I can't hear you. I have pencils in my ears.
Well, now that was never safe.
What are you trying to tell me? That I have pencils in? I can't hear you. I have pencils in my ears.
And they need sharpening.
Yeah. So the big story today, of course.
The story.
Is the hurricane in Florida and thereabouts. The thing about Youngkin, I keep seeing rumors that he's not going to finish his term and he's just going to go run for president or something. Why on earth would anybody in their right mind, given what's going on, want to be in the Senate?
I don't know, although I'm not certain why anybody would want to do any of these.
I have to ask Herschel Walker, but, you don't get answers from Herschel Walker, so I don't know if it's worth asking. He's got pencils in his ears and he can't hear you.
Yeah, 50% chance he says, the Senate? What?
Or the other 50% is, I don't know, what's that got to do with trees?
Yeah, right. All I wanted to do was talk about how many trees there were, and aren't there enough?
Right.
He may not know what he's doing.
Trees, climate change.
Mm-hmm,
Eye of the Storm is the title of a piece that Dan Rather wrote. For talking about what's going on with this hurricane situation, and he simply gets to the point and says the full scale of the damage will take a long time to assess, which is true. It's a good reminder. If you remember Katrina, it looked bad when it hit. We knew it was bad the next day, but it really took like a week to fully assess the damage because you couldn't even get into the bad areas.
Yeah, I was just thinking, according to MAGA doctrine, I should just say if it's not reported in the first 24 hours, you're not getting reimbursed. Sorry.
Not only that, who cares? You move on to something else. So this is a big deal.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people are already dead. There's going to be more found. And the rescue operation is going to be immense. FEMA's there. They're cooperating with DeSantis. It's so big,
believe it or not,
and so important that DeSantis is actually behaving. So that gives you an idea of just how bad it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, at some level, he has to realize, people are going to want to, string me up if I screw them over or rake them over the coals after this.
Well, how you respond to disasters is part of the deal in terms of when you're running for re-election. So people know this, and if that's an incentive to do the right thing, cool. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to keep you in line. It's a rough justice kind of a tool, but I mean, I'll take it.
Right. So Dan Rather writes, the
That's what we've
pictures out
got.
of Florida and the accompanying stories are horrific and heartbreaking. Terror, loss, fracturing of lives into before and an unknowable after. The full scale of the damage will take a long time to assess. There are the immediate wounds of natural disaster, loss of life, destroyed property, the emotional trauma of prolonged power and infrastructure outages, and that national natural disasters have always been part of the human experience. But humans have helped increase the danger, and then makes the point, just as the wake of a mass shooting is the right time to talk about our national gun problems, the wake of a natural disaster is the right time to talk about climate crisis. And
Okay.
also our social divisions.
Okay. Sure. Let's do that.
Oh,
then.
he's right about both. Sadly, Hurricane Ian is not an isolated event. It's a harbinger of more chaotic future, and we would be wise to learn from its lessons. Of course, we're not wise, so we won't.
Oh, well.
Most of us can provide little immediate help for those in the path of this storm, rather than to say we see you and we hear you, we will be there for you, and we make that pledge. We shouldn't forget those in Puerto Rico, Alaska, and other areas recently enduring natural disasters. It's unlikely the storm will cause those stoking our destructive politics to rethink their approach, but maybe it'll help the rest of us refocus. So, again, DeSantis is DeSantis, Youngkin is Youngkin, but, it's important to keep in mind that this brings us back to, instead of just dumping on them, think about what's important.
Okay. I mean,
Hey, if it focuses the minds of voters, all to the better.
yeah, I mean, I guess so. And it focuses his mind. All this, if you hadn't been dumping on him all this time, who knows how well he would be, or, how he would be compelled to respond to this thing. I got a cushion on this. We can let some people suffer.
Right. Now, one thing about Florida, they're not inexperienced when it comes to hurricanes and natural disasters. This particular one was just bad. Hit in a bad place. The left side of Florida, the Gulf side, is shallow water, and that means it all gets pushed up much easier. But they are pretty skilled at what to do. The thing is, this is on such a huge scale that they won't have the resources to do it all by themselves. And SFEMA's there, and electric linemen from all over the country are already there, or at least pre-positioned. It's still going to take a long time to get power back and potable water, clean up the damage. And by then, you'll have mold growing on everything. Remember that from Katrina. And so, again, it's going to be a while before all of this gets settled. So just, keep that in mind. It's a slow-moving but horrible story.
Well, slow-moving storm, slow-moving story, I guess, both.
Other things are going on while that happens. Here's an interesting piece in the Washington Post, and there's no particular theme. I'm just going to pick stories randomly in terms of what caught my interest this morning. That's what we do on Thursdays and Mondays and Wednesdays. On the Hill, this is in the Washington Post, Electoral Count Act changes become the latest Trump loyalty test.
Okay.
The bill to update the Electoral Count Act, hugely important because Trump tried to steal the election.
Yes.
Okay, is on a surprisingly easy path to Senate passage, as support among Republicans continues to grow. While the bill appears likely to be a major bipartisan win, yet another for Joe Biden, I would point out the split among Republican lawmakers on the bill, spotlighting the continued tensions in the GOP over the party's leader, former President Donald Trump. To make a long story short, everybody who's a Republican in the House voted against it, and then Ted Cruz. To give you an idea what kind of company the House keeps.
Yes. Well, all right.
Right?
That's Ted for you.
That's Ted for you. You remember, what's his name, Prosobiec? The guy that was all into the Pizzagate stuff?
Yeah, and I confuse him. There's another guy who's equally odious, and I confuse him with the... but anyway, he's a horrible guy. That part is clear.
He's a horrible guy.
So there's another one, too.
He was caught on camera campaigning with Doug Mastriano.
Doug Mastriano was campaigning. Oh.
And a person who sent the tweet, and I don't have it at my fingertips right now, said something along the lines of, if you're trying to make the case that you're really a moderate, campaigning with this guy is not the way to make the case. And I thought that was absolutely true. If Prosobiec wants to make the case that he's a moderate, there's no way he should be seen anywhere near Doug Mastriano.
That's true. And he is trying to, work his way back into the mainstream somehow.
Right. So, all of that, I think, is just, part of the deal there. So Trump hasn't focused much on the bill, but the report here, Senator Ted Cruz followed the lead of House Republicans, nearly all of whom voted against the bill, when he opposed the bill in committee on Tuesday, calling it a bad bill, bad for democracy, the only one of nine Republicans on the Senate Rules Committee to do so. And that's, of course, because Ted Cruz has presidential ambitions. It's not because he thinks the bill is bad. It's not because he has, deep-rooted reasons to not do that. And that raises another issue. Elena Treen, writing in Axios, talks about the fact that GOP leaders, particularly on the House side, congressional aides and business groups are preparing for a potential nightmare scenario next year if the House Republicans take back the majority, a debt limit showdown reminiscent of the near crisis in 2011. Why would they think to take, as they call it, a hostage you can't shoot? Because they're that stupid.
Oh. All right. Well, I can get along
with that. And her next tweet is the one I really wanted to focus on. There are serious question marks and underlying anxiety surrounding what type of leader Kevin McCarthy will be if elected as House Speaker. How he handles a debt limit showdown will be a crucial test of his leadership abilities, for which key stakeholders are already privately planning. Which is fancy Washington speak for, look, everybody knows he's not up to the job. He's terrible. He'd be awful at this. It's an open secret. And this is how you describe it in Washington speak.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fairly accurate. I assume
it's just amazing to me. It's like, voting for
Caucus.
Herschel Walker. I know he's terrible. There's no question about that. That's not the argument. It's that he'd be a reliable Republican vote because he doesn't know enough to vote on his own. He would do whatever he's been told.
Yeah, unlikely that he'll.
That's why he's going to get 49%.
Yeah. Well, right.
Hopefully Warnock would get 51 again. But what's McCarthy got to offer? Nothing. But he's not Nancy Pelosi. That's it. So that's why people vote for Republicans. It's got nothing to do with their own talents. They don't have any. It's got nothing to do with their own ideas. They don't have any.
Yeah, pretty much.
So speaking of no ideas, or if you have them at all, they're bad ideas, let's turn to the financial crisis in merry old England.
See how merry they are after this.
This is a tweet from Shiv Ramdas. Apologies if this has ever come up before, but has the UK considered reviving the economy by joining, a large economic and political consortium of countries nearby, say in Europe?
NAFTA. Okay, well, all right. We got room for you.
Right. This is Bloomberg. The UK's crisis of confidence was years in the making, and I feel vindicated in focusing on Liz Truss and the UK leadership race a couple of weeks ago. It's not our country. We generally focus on domestic politics, but clearly it was going to have ramifications. And so it does. The UK thought it had the trust of markets until it didn't. Now homeowners and businesses will likely have to pay the price. Well, we have to vote for the Conservatives, say businesses. We have to vote for the... What the hell did we just do? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what happens when you support Kevin McCarthy.
Oh, yeah. And they don't even do that.
We're conservative. We have to do, what the hell did we just do?
Yeah. That's right. If you don't think it through. And I mean, it's not like you didn't have a long and extended debate about that. It was just you were debating with people who say, facts are so boring. I want to do something fun and exciting and rebellious.
So Britain is in a self-inflicted financial crisis, years in the making, that threatens to accelerate the economy's dive into recession, and the country's new prime minister is coming under intense pressure to blink. In the week since the government unveiled the biggest tax cuts since 1972 with scant detail of how they will be financed, the pound has crashed to its lowest at lowest ever level against the dollar. The cost of insuring British government debt against the risk of default has soared to the highest since 2016, and the Bank of England has been forced to intervene amid concerns about the nation's pension funds. So the Bank of England came to the rescue during the Brexit vote when everybody thought that this was a huge mistake and what the heck is going to go on, and they intervened. They're intervening now. They'll stabilize things for now. But what happens next will determine just how deep the looming recession proves. Central to that question is whether Liz Truss's 3-week-old administration can restore its credibility with investors. And that's really the bottom line there. In other words, the mini budget, which has become a flashpoint for not just investors' short-term concerns about unfunded tax cuts at a time when inflation is running close to a 4-decade high, or the Bank of England's failure to contain price growth, it's given sharp focus to their long-held fears about Britain, its current account deficit, its fractious relationship with its closest trading partner, and above all, a mistrust of what successive politicians promise. And somebody had posted, one of these picture memes along the lines of, well, for the 4th time in a row, we have the worst possible ever British Prime Minister. Well, just wait till the next one.
Worst possible, and they're all. It's like a global warming thing. They're all in the last. 4 out of the last 5.
Yeah, 4 out of the last 5 are just terrible.
Yeah,
it's the latest in a long line of self-imposed economically illiterate decisions, said Peter Kinsella, global head of FX strategy at Union Bancaire Privée UBP SA.
Wow. EFIT Strategies? What was the name?
Well, yeah, that's right. That's what it's abbreviated. EFIT Strategies.
All right.
It's part of FUBAR Incorporated, which, of course, is a division of Engulf and Devour.
Yes, from the makers of
Godamitol.
Brexit,
and now we're seeing the latest iteration. As markets tumbled, the Bank of England was forced into action to prevent a gilt market crash and deployed a variant of a policy tool Truss spent recent months criticizing. That's the funny part.
Okay.
It promised to buy whatever long-dated gilts were needed to restore order to the market. That set off a rally in long-date gilts, but increases two risks: that the bank will have to raise rates even further within weeks, and the investors could take fright at whether the Bank of England is bankrolling the government at the moment.
Okay. Yikes. All right. Well,
but they have no choice. They really have to, rescue. They have to.
So 3 weeks, she has killed the Queen and ruined the economy.
Yeah. So,
good job.
Good job.
Yeah. Must be fun. All right. Well, is that cat still at 10 Downing Street? Or
the cat lives there. Everybody else is just a transient.
Okay. I'm just curious.
So a gilt is a UK government liability in sterling issued by His Majesty Treasury.
I see.
And listed on the London Stock Exchange. The term gilt or gilt-edged security is a reference to the primary characteristic of gilts as an investment. They're supposed to be secure investments, and that's why them dropping is like a big deal.
Is it GILT?
It's like, nobody wants to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. They're worthless.
What?
Well, then the federal government will prop it up by buying them. That's basically what's happening over there.
Oh, all right. Scared me there for a second.
Well, it should scare you. It scared them.
Right.
That's what's going on in England, and that's why it's a big crisis. Anyway, so we'll have to keep an eye on that one. And then, of course, what's going on in Ukraine and Russia.
All right. How's
Two things on the ground. The situation looks increasingly precarious for the Russian forces in Lyman, as the Ukrainian forces are about to cut them off. Another painful defeat for the Russians is looming. So Kherson is very slow going. Russians are dug in. And everything that you gain in blood and treasure. In Lyman, however, more of the rapid moving, cut them off and then destroy them sort of thing that we saw in Kharkiv, a little bit north of there. And so basically on the ground, Russia continues to lose, but winter's coming. The mud season's already started, and so things are expected to slow down. And because Putin is losing and knows he's losing, he decided to announce that there was going to be this referendum in the occupied territories, and something like a 97% vote for the Russians, oddly enough. And so, therefore, he's going to announce either late today or tomorrow, depending upon the time, that Russia has annexed these and now they're part of Russia. That means he can't give them back. That means he gets to defend them with whatever means necessary, including nuclear weapons, at least in his mind.
Right.
Whether or not that works or doesn't work, of course, is to be debated. And so, lots of discussion about that. Lawrence Friedman writing in Substack, cannon fodder, what difference will mobilization make to the war? And the short answer is not much. Using people as cannon fodder is old strategy. He goes back to Henry IV, Part 1 in Shakespeare. Falstaff describes people like that as food for powder, which was the current term, since replaced with cannon fodder since World War I. And so this will happen, and people will die, and Putin won't care. And that's combined with sabotaging the 2 gas pipelines from Russia to Germany.
Yeah, why'd you do that?
Why did he do that?
No, you.
Well,
I blame you.
Different reasons.
Oh, okay.
He did it basically to send a message. They weren't sending gas anyway.
That's true.
But he demonstrates that Russian gas might be lost, some sort of signal to the Nordic countries to remind them of their vulnerability despite being part of NATO, a threat to the new pipeline from Norway to the Baltic, a darker warning about the vulnerability of all underwater pipes and cables should Russia want to inflict more disruption.
Or Tucker Carlson.
So, all of those reasons. So, more to talk about in terms of Russia and Ukraine. But I think in the first half hour, first segment, we got pretty much the biggest news that's going on out there right now.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Well, whatever smaller news you have, or expansions on the bigger news.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about the election. We'll talk about the Supreme Court.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were deliberating a little bit over the break. I was just wondering yesterday, and I don't know if I have worked out what I think is going on here, but I was curious about who insures the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and whether or not, given that they weren't really moving any gas through it and that it was kind of leaky and it wasn't producing any revenue, plus, of course, all sorts of geopolitical reasons for wanting to threaten the gas supply to the rest of Europe, might have been a good time for someone, probably the Russians, to sabotage the thing or to blow it up and blame it on somebody else. They don't lose a great deal of revenue out of it. And if it's insured, like maybe they actually thought that they would collect some sort of insurance money for it. Of course, if there's any doubts about whether or not they themselves blew it up, that will make the insurers less than enthusiastic about paying out. And,
there is an insurance consortium.
Okay.
According to Reuters. And that is French,
Oui.
Swiss, and German.
Also we. And I guess.
Yeah.
And
so
and
worries
also.
over fresh sanctions led top European insurers. This was from December 2021. And reinsurers, the Germans are the reinsurers. If you need assurance, look for reinsurers.
Yes. So
To
all
pull out of
there,
insuring the construction this year without cover, the pipeline operator could also be exposed to costs for damage, delays, or litigation. So the Biden administration earlier this year waived sanctions on the pipeline's operating company, which theoretically enables non-U.S. companies to provide financing and insurance, while Germany's agreed to take action if Russia uses energy as a weapon. This was back a year ago. But not clear what happened then. So, and I don't know who wound up
doing the insurance,
doing the actual insuring.
Yeah, and we may never really figure that out.
It's not going to be one group, one country. It's going to be a consortium.
Yeah, it'll be distributed across Europe. But depending on where the administration of it all lands and the ultimate responsibility for beginning to move money, it'd be interesting to see where the impact falls. If it's in, my initial thought was these kinds of projects tend to be brokered through Lloyd's of London, but I don't know that this one actually was. There's no mention of them in that article.
Right. This was one in February of 2021. Earlier that year, 15 insurers stopped doing business with Nord Stream. So they were having trouble in the beginning, and they were having trouble in the middle, and now they're having trouble still.
And then they blew it up. So that's troublesome too. I was just sort of curious about whether or not it would spark some sort of insurance crisis in the middle of the UK financial crisis.
I can't find who actually insures them.
Yeah,
all I can find are articles about the people who dropped out who won't insure them.
Yeah, I don't know. All the people who did insure them or were thinking about it fell out windows, and then what happened? Nothing. Yeah. So I don't know. There was. I noticed that yesterday, just sort of briefly researching. I guess by the time all this played out, everybody who was, if there was anyone willing to insure them, probably wanted to do it pretty discreetly, and so maybe this just not a whole lot of coverage of it. I don't know. Sounds like a trouble issue, but I'm not an insurance guy. It was just a thought.
It's complicated.
Someone else will have to explain it. Yes.
So this is from Financial Times. Putin has once again overplayed his hand in Ukraine. Russian leaders' reckless moves have one goal: turn the tables in a war he is losing. If you step back and look at the big picture, whether it's the pipeline or whether it's the referenda or whether it's the mobilization, what he's trying to do is buy himself time, get through the winter, and hope that things happen. One of the things he hopes happens is that the Republicans take over the House. If the Republicans take over the House, Ukrainian aid from the United States will be more difficult, which is, by the way, another reason to vote Democratic this fall.
Oh.
Just to remind everybody. But if Kevin McCarthy, who doesn't know what he's doing and is basically a tool, winds up being the speaker, it's going to be harder to get votes to get Ukrainian aid. Although if it's like a 3 or 4 seat majority, that's something that McCarthy absolutely cannot manage. He's not Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what happens, and nobody else does either. Still, the point is Putin is trying to buy time. He knows he can't win, so he's trying not to lose. And one of the ways to do that is send all this cannon fodder in and at the same time try to make trouble for the Nordic countries and the Europeans and the European adjacent, like the United Kingdom. So that, he gets less support to Ukraine from those places. And hopefully over time, if he waits everything out, he wins. That's his thinking, and that's what's going on.
All right.
Now events will overtake, of course. Events, my dear boy, events. So, those are the things that you have to worry about. Here's a Politico article on that. Ukraine aid faces tougher crowd if Republicans take over.
Yes.
America faces tougher times if Republicans take over. So, that's all part and parcel of all of this. By the way, the Supreme Court, which has chosen poorly, as they say in the Indiana Jones movies, there's a Gallup report out. Supreme Court trust and job approval at historical lows. The pollster John Anzalone says this is what happens when SCOTUS nominees lie about settled law at their nomination hearings and then reverse 50 years of settled law. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand that. But the trust is gone. Americans' trust in the judicial branch of the federal government is now down to 47%. Typically, that's in the 80s.
Oh.
So that is a big drop. I sent you the graph. I sent you the story. But just a couple of years ago, 2019, it was up at 69. 47% 47 is
Nice.
a big drop.
Yes. All right. Well, that's problematic. We just heard yesterday that Amy Berman Jackson was saying, well, the United States may have to rely on the judicial branch to save democracy after all.
And that's why we're in trouble.
Yeah, only 40. That's the big problem. And that's what they're working on, as they've been trying to do that. If the judges step in and save democracy, the anti-democratic forces are prepared to help further undermine American confidence in the people who would be saving us.
Under Roe, things were stable. Under
truth.
Dobbs, we've had a 7-point drop since last year.
All right.
That's a lot in a poll like this.
Yes. I blame you, Dobbs.
Well,
And why not?
I blame Alito.
Oh, okay. Right. Actually, I don't know who Dobbs is.
So here's a story from
think about that
MSNBC,
for a
something we
second.
were talking about the other day, by Michael Cohen, the journalist, not Michael Cohen, the sleazy lawyer. Democrats' strategy to boost MAGA Republicans is vindicated. Wherever sane Republicans remain in office, they remain largely enablers of the party's anti-democracy majority. Some pundits and even some Democratic politicians took the party leadership to task for what on the surface might seem like a cynical decision. Democrats or their political consultants, wrote Amy Davidson Sorkin in the New Yorker last August, may have become too enraptured by the idea of their own cleverness or toughness to recognize they were immersing themselves deeper in folly by boosting the candidacies of pro-Trump Republicans. Dishonorable, dangerous, and just damn wrong, said Minnesota Representative Dean Phillips, to risk putting people in Congress who would undermine the nation's democratic guardrails. As you know, I took exception to all of this throughout because it's Republicans who pick who Republicans are going to nominate. It's not Democrats. And no matter how you write it up and tut-tut, that's really not what's going on. What's going on is Republicans are picking these people.
Some Democrats aren't comfortable unless they are seen criticizing Democrats.
Right. Last week, however, congressional Republicans proved that from a good government standpoint, Democrats were justified in their political strategies, such as it was. And the country received another unfortunate reminder that modern Republican Party cannot be trusted to protect American democracy. On Wednesday, the House voted on the Presidential Election Reform Act. Well, you know that because we covered it in the first segment. The bill would protect American elections from the kind of machinations that endangered our electoral process 2 years ago, such as making it more difficult for state legislators to overrule election results and clarifying the vice president plays only a ministerial role.
But they didn't do that.
Ministerial isn't as cool a word as gubernatorial, but it's pretty still a cool word in counting electoral votes and has a particular meaning. Every Democrat backed the legislation. 9 Republicans joined them. All holdout Republicans like Liz Cheney are either retiring or like Cheney lost their party's nomination. 8 of the 9 voted to impeach. We talked about the guy that didn't. He felt bad about it. This contingent, along with a handful of others, were seen as the few bulwarks within the GOP willing to stand up and fight for basic democratic norms, but of course they don't exist. So a few apostates like Peter Mayer do not change the fundamental fact that the House GOP has little interest in safeguarding American democracy. Mayer, if he had won, would have become another enabler of the GOP's anti-democracy caucus. So what difference does it make who the Republicans nominated? He makes the point I've been making.
True.
It really doesn't matter. Their so-called moderates aren't moderate. Look at Glenn Youngkin.
True also.
Point you made. Democrats may have partisan, even cynical reasons for wanting to defeat House Republicans, but can anybody really argue from a pro-democracy perspective they're wrong? Is American democracy better off with a Democratic majority in the House or a Republican majority? It's that simple, really.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, the thing that justifies anything that Democrats do to beat Republicans, frankly, is Republicans.
That's true, too, right? They're ultimately, look,
They're ultimately responsible, and they're not good people. They're not good representatives of democracy. They ought not to be in office, and it's okay to vote against them at all times for all things, at least this year.
Yeah, in the end, it reminds me of nothing so much as the other excuse we've heard all along from the non-moderate Republicans. You made me become a Nazi. And now you made us nominate and then possibly elect a crazy person. You know?
Well, you're a national conservative.
Yeah, I guess so.
That makes you a Nazi.
Nazi. Right. Well, okay. I like that.
If you did not see it coming, it was there. There's nothing you could do. It's who they are. And so all you have to do is pick up any MAGA rally and look at the Confederate flags and, find the traitors.
Yes, right. And waking up in the morning and observing the sun rising and betting on the fact that the day will in fact be light is not manipulating, space and time here. It's just illustrating how it is. There just aren't enough people meddling in these primaries to overcome the vast majority of people who are casting their votes in the primaries who are Republicans.
Right.
That's the way it is.
So I read an interesting column, not necessarily interesting in a good way, but just interesting,
Okay.
by a columnist who I really more or less loathe.
I'm sorry.
Gary Abernathy, who writes in the Washington Post. This is a Midwestern conservative who was picked because he's a Trump-supporting Midwestern conservative, and he's supposed to be the voice of Midwestern conservatives.
When did this start?
As Gary Abernathy goes, so goes Ohio, or something along those lines. And for months and months and months, if not years, he's basically been a Trump justifier, a Trump enabler.
I've missed his entire tenure at the Washington Post, I'm happy to say.
Yeah. He's not a shrill, sort of Mark Thiessen kind of Trump enabler. But nonetheless, it's more the New York Times, the Russ Douthat, David Brooks style of, if you look at it reasonably, what you really have to see is that Trump has a point here, and he has a point there, and he has a point there, and of course the Democrats are going too far on this, that, and everything else. So really, when you come down to it, the only logical thing to do is support Trump, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So the title of this one is Trump had his chance and blew it. His supporters deserve better. Very surprising article given the source. And the reason I thought it was interesting, I didn't say it was good. The reason I thought it was interesting is because sort of a template of how do you run in Trump areas. If you're looking to keep the House and you're a Democrat running in an R+3 or a Trump +5 area, how do you approach talking to the constituents there, some of whose votes you want?
Right.
So it isn't enough to just say, well, you all suck. You know that, right? Vote for me. That's not going to work. So what he says in the piece, each passing day brings the country closer to the midterm elections, and even more significantly, Trump's almost certain declaration of his candidacy for presidency in 2024. Remember, this is a big Trump supporter. Like whatever he does, I can find some reason where it's okay. And he says, let's hope he decides otherwise, which is really a breakthrough for him. When Trump finally jumped into presidential politics with both feet, I was intrigued. In a column for the local paper in Southern Ohio, where I was publisher and editor, I questioned Trump's staying power, but noted it's always fun to watch somebody enter the political fray. It doesn't have a typical political background, doesn't play by the rules. That's what I mean about justifying everything.
Yeah, okay.
By January 16th, I recognized Trump's inevitability and writing about a conversation with a friend who, like other old school conservatives locally and nationally, couldn't fathom a GOP presidential ticket led by Trump, I said, start fathoming. 9 months later, my newspaper became one of only 6 in the country to endorse Trump. You may remember him from that.
Well, that's bad.
Leading to a rather shocking level of scrutiny for a small newspaper's 2-sentence endorsement. Trump's world-shaking victory that November was exciting. After years of working in both journalism and politics, I was fascinated by somebody breaking all the standard rules and succeeding. I was optimistic. Think about it. As strange as it might sound, Trump in 2017 enjoyed a rare chance to usher in a new era of bipartisanship. And stepping back, basically what he's saying is, look, he's not beholden to anybody. He's a rich businessman who owes nobody nothing. The establishment didn't support him. He can do whatever he wants. Here's how we can bring everybody together for bipartisanship to finally do something about immigration reform. That's basically his stance.
Okay.
Right? Seldom had a president-elect been so well positioned to bring a fresh approach. Americans gave Trump a chance despite his drawbacks. For one reason, they wanted change. Despite much media criticism, Trump's main issues were important, tackling illegal immigration. Anybody who says that, you know where they're coming from. Migrants coming here, for example, are quite often, not always, refugees and therefore illegal. But, He lumps them all together. Sure. Bolstering U.S. energy independence and reworking trade deals were reasonable goals, defending traditional beliefs of Middle America without belittling movements reflective of changing times was a balance Trump seemed poised to achieve.
What?
Now, he's not wrong there. You may remember Trump was running as, I don't have anything against anybody at the time, except Mexicans.
Yeah, right.
But everybody else, I'm from New York. I can do this. I can do that. I'm not going to be stuck with you have to support the military no matter what. Look what I said about John McCain. I'm really flexible. I can take a new approach with this. So Abernathy says, I envision Trump first trying to work with GOP leaders in Congress and failing that, moving effortlessly across the aisle to partner with Democrats.
And now he has a column.
There were people who really thought this.
Wow. Okay.
He's not the only one. He represents a lot of voters who thought that.
Yeah, but so
he was spectacularly wrong, but he represents a lot of voters who thought that. So what happened? Choose your theory. Groundwork for impeachment was laid by his enemies. Trump was hamstrung by investigations. He was politically incorrect, plain-spoken utterances and tweets. And finally, you're dominated by a novel coronavirus that was politicized as a weapon against him. Remember, he's a Trump enabler. That's why it's so significant to say, I don't regret giving Trump a chance, but basically he had his chance. He blew it. I'm not going back. He should move on, as should his supporters. That's really the important part of it. So if you're approaching people who voted for Trump and you want their votes, you might, use this as a bit of a template and say, look, I get all of that. I sort of understand. I didn't agree with you, but I understand where you were coming from when you voted for him. Now is not the time. You can't vote for him now. You need to vote for somebody else. And if you can't bring yourself to do that, it's okay. Stay home.
All right. That's a good message.
So it's there, right. And in drips and drabs you start to see it. The fact of the matter is Trump has lost support. He may have the support of the majority of the Republican Party or even a minority of the Republican Party in solid enough fashion so that in a split primary 35 to 40% wins like he did the first time. And therefore, he's still the nominee. But there's no question he's losing support. And among the people he's losing support from are the Gary Abernathys of the world. I think that's notable, and so we note it.
All right. Well,
It doesn't mean that you have to celebrate Gary Abernathy, put him on a pedestal, read the rest of his columns, like the guy, or anything like that. It's interesting information.
Okay. It's worth keeping in mind, and I would keep an eye on the guy saying, well, okay, I said all of those things, but now I think Trump in a second term, unbound by re-election concerns, would be free to do the things I thought he was going to do the first time.
Right, and there are people who do that, and I'm reminded, for example, of Hugh Hewitt, who said, no Trump, no way, no how, what? He seems to be winning. Okay, well, I can live with it. From now on, I'm a Trumpist, and everybody who doesn't agree with me, there's something wrong with you. There are people that took that route. Lindsey Graham's another,
right.
So there's a whole camp of those. And there are people who, like Rusty Bowers in Arizona, who you may remember from the January 6th committee testimony, started by saying, I'm a solid Republican, period. And then I looked at what Trump was doing, and no, there was no fraud in the election in Arizona, and I have to support that. And I'm a big, firm believer in democracy, but I'm still a conservative. And in fact, when push comes to shove, if you ask me, I'd vote for him again to finally, look, I saw what happened after I can't support him. I'm done.
Okay.
I am finished. And so Abernathy's more or less in that camp. And there are people who are, again, what are you talking about? You're talking about peeling off 3-4% of the Republican Party who votes for him. A small number, but not an insignificant number, enough to make them lose. And that's really the bottom line. So if you're talking about Democrats supporting with a weird strategy of saying that the moderate is bad, and if that means that you wind up voting for the extremists, so be it. I'll take my lumps in the election and see what happens, and you think that's evil. Maybe they were just saying the moderate is bad. And so if the moderate wins, we already have put out ads saying the moderate is bad. So we're going to come out with ads saying the moderate is bad. Because the moderate is still going to wind up, not doing what you wish. Here in my district in Connecticut 5, Johanna Hayes, the Democrat, is running against a relative moderate, George Logan, a Youngkin style in terms of how he campaigns. He's not completely nutty, but the fact of the matter is that whatever his stance on abortion, whatever his stance on any issue, the first and single and most important thing you have to ask about him is if George Logan is elected in Connecticut 5 instead of the Democrat, who will he vote for Speaker? And the answer is Kevin McCarthy, who's incompetent and shouldn't be in that position. And so there's no way. And that's how he's going to wind up losing here, not because, you're making the case that somehow or other, this guy is a radical like the rest of the radical Republicans. That's not how you make the case. You make the case by saying he's okay with them. He may not be a radical Republican, but he's perfectly okay with them. He may not be an insurrectionist. There's no way this guy would ever be at a January 6th style thing. But he'll vote for people who were. He'll vote for people who were as Speaker, if that's what it came to, because, he'll do whatever the Republican majority wants to do. He'll go along with the will of the majority. And so you can't have people like that in Congress representing you in this day and age. And that's how you have to run against him in a place like Connecticut, Yeah. So,
that makes sense.
Who learned that lesson too late? Terry McAuliffe.
Yes. Well, did he? I mean,
well,
it was too
did
late.
he ever learn it? I don't know, but he ran the wrong campaign
but it was certainly
for the
too
wrong
late.
time.
I guess so, because he's not the
lost.
governor. Yeah. So, yes. Right. Well, that's worth pointing out, certainly. And, it occurred to me in the middle of that discussion is that whole, what a terrible strategy. They ran ads saying that the moderate was terrible. And then I was thinking, what about in a situation where, in fact, the Republican voters don't nominate the MAGA nut and nominate the moderate? And then, would we then be saying, look how prescient this strategy was? They've been advertising that this guy is terrible for a long time.
I would say that. Defining him before he even had a chance to run.
Right.
That's what I would say. So
what?
I was perfectly okay.
It's a political
with that
genius.
strategy.
Oh, wait, no. So the other guy won? Oh, well, then that was political suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
How so? Okay.
Right. And so, and thank you for calling my tirade discussion. That was very kind of you.
Okay. There you are. Was it a tirade? It didn't feel like a tirade. You have that way. Okay. Good.
Just,
it's a skill.
People like Abern, and I wrote, instead of, dumping on him, why don't you just see what he's saying and see if you could use it? And people said, I read it. I'm dumping on him.
Okay.
It's all right,
That's fair.
It's okay. It's a twofer.
All right.
Well, why not both, as the meme goes?
Right. Okay. That's true. You get the chance to do both.
And then last thing I'm talking about is sort of an interesting topic that we haven't talked about enough, probably, but there's so many other things going on, and that's the state and status of the pandemic. And this is a piece from a newsletter in Substack by your local epidemiologist.
Mine.
Well, actually, that's the title of it, your local epidemiologist.
All right, like my eye doctor, which it isn't. Okay.
And it's pretty good. It's Caitlin Jedolina. I think she's very good, and she writes to sort of explain things. And the first piece, which was the most recent one, followed by Bivalent Boosters, Science Update. Turns out people actually are getting the booster, but slowly. Still better now than a year ago at this time. So more people are doing the bivalent booster than was getting the regular booster a year ago this time. Still lower than it needs to be. So there's like 4.5 million people that have it, but 13 million flu vaccines were administered by this time last year.
Right.
Oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Just
pretty much. So
okay.
There's every reason to do it. A reminder why a bivalent booster will help in 3 distinct ways, at least hopefully in theory. 1, greater protection against infection and transmission. 2, longer protection. 3, broader protection.
All right.
Okay. And we have 2 new studies with promising data, at least for the greater protection and broader protection. So that seems to be the case. So the bottom line is emerging evidence on bivalent vaccines is encouraging. Even with new subvariants on the horizon, they will help in one way or another. Be sure to get your booster this fall. Love, your local epidemiologist.
All right.
Right. So she's sending it with love, so you should go ahead and do it.
Right. Okay.
The other more detailed one is a look at the concept of original antigenic sin,
Wow.
abbreviated OAS.
Oh,
You will
yes.
see this
Huh,
a lot thrown about by the anti-vaxxers and vaccine rejectors, and so that's why it's worthwhile spending a little bit of time doing about that. Many are trying to decide whether to get another booster. In order to make this decision, benefits must be weighed against risks. More than 11.3 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been distributed, so we're well aware that the vast majority of side effects are mild, but are there other risks, like original antigenic sin?
I don't know.
Now, original antigenic sin is one of the most complicated and misunderstood parts of an already complex immune system. I partnered with Edward Nirenberg to translate the science. What is it? What is the science saying about it? And is it a risk that should be weighed for a fourth booster? Here's a disclaimer. This post was incredibly difficult to write, my hardest since the pandemic. It's very complex. Even PhD immunologists get mixed up with, and I am one. This makes translating the topic even more difficult. I hope I don't lose you, but if I do, just go to the bottom line section and buckle up. So basically, what happens is that if you've never seen a virus like COVID before, you get infected, your B cells start to make a single antibody shape against it. They pump out huge quantities, and then it's a special kind of response. The prior memory can interfere and prevent you from generating antibodies against new variants. So the question is it bad to have been infected prior because that response will somehow interfere with your response? And is that true for infection? And is that true for vaccine? And that's what original antigenic sin is. Okay. So in other words, can another booster make your response worse rather than better? Can getting it a second time make your body's response worse rather than better because you were previously infected and you have some sort of protection? And the bottom line answer is there's no evidence for that.
Okay.
If you're eligible, go get your booster. Love, your local epidemiologist.
Yeah. You can become the evidence for it if you're a doubter, I guess. But
So we got all of that in. I just thought that was important.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to get it. And I guess now I'll have...
If you haven't, folks, it's time.
Now I'll know that when people bring that up, I'll say, nah, this sounds like crap. All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
No real-world evidence for that could be your answer. It'd be pretty funny.
Yep. Oh, time
All right,
for us to
I'll
get
see you.
back. All right. Very good. Thanks, Greg, making his exit as we make our entrance back. And we were having a good old time. We wanted an extra minute of discussion. That's why I keep thinking maybe that top of the hour break needs to be longer. But then you would be sad because we wouldn't have come back to you so quickly. Besides which, it's interesting and fun to find out that, yeah, Greg's still on the phone and still saying things. And if he had come back in 15 seconds earlier than that, you would have gotten an earful. We were just discussing also that one vaccine clip that I love to play. This one.
Oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Yeah, I was just thinking, oh, well, now that I have the much more fun censoring horn that I use instead of the bleep, I should I recut that thing? Although I don't even know where I can find the original anymore. Maybe it's still around. But then if I recut it with the Aruga horn instead of the beep, but then I realized that this little thing, which is 3 seconds long, would be like 15 minutes long with the Aruga. Every time I have to go back and edit a show for something like that, I cut it up right for timing so that the breaks fall at all the right places if we ever rebroadcast a show. Which we frequently do, and we'll have to talk about what's going to happen next Wednesday. That reminds me. But at any rate, when I do that and I line up all the breaks correctly, and then I realize, I actually have to produce a version of this that would be, safe for airing in case anybody ever really actually gave about whether or not we had profanity on the air. I can't imagine who would do it, but in keeping with our tradition. But I do bleep or Aruga horn those things out, and then it's so long. I mean, the bleep is a fraction of a second, but these things are so long that they very frequently extend the segment and push me past the break point. And now, speaking of being pushed past the breaking point, I guess was our top of the hour break not scheduled, or did we come back a little too early, or what happened? So Scott just texted me that 4 or 5 little expletives make it through the break, and on the, because we were having that chat, me and Greg, and he works blue during the breaks, everybody. So enjoy that. That's one of the fun aspects of listening to the show live. Of course, that'll all be edited out of the podcast, because that's what I would have done with the chatter during the break anyway, no matter what's going on. But, oh well, let it be a lesson to nobody, really, because why would we want to get rid of that aspect of things? If it's airing again, if it's ever aired on terrestrial radio with all sorts of rules about what can be in your content and what can't, it will be replaced by Arugas, and doesn't matter. It's the live show where you get to hear stuff like that. Oh well, it alarms no one. We're subject to no rules, and that's it. So just consider it a bonus and an exciting version of the show that you won't hear otherwise. All right, we move on, and let's see what other I'm in the wrong section here for figuring out what else there is to share with you. Okay. And I don't know. Scott's got other messages for me too here. Are we well now that must be concerning. That I got this note that just after the 10 o'clock break here, that 4 or 5 things that should have been censored just came out through the air. And then there's another one. Now you're off the air. And now back in and out. So I guess we're having some signal issues here, but it's not, I can assure you it's not anyone like worried about the content of the show going off the rails and saying, oh my God, we have to protect the delicate ears of our listeners. I mean, we ought to protect the delicate ears of our listeners, but that's not what's going on. If it's happening by accident, not because we care about you and your morality. Because, we do, but we're not concerning ourselves with it at this point. It's an adult audience, I think. I mean, if you're a kid, first of all, you should be in school. Second of all, whatever else. All right, let's see. Where were we here? I'm distracted by about 15 other things. Right. Oh, yes. You know what? Here's another update on a story we can't get rid of because the guy can't stop being a story. What's his name? J.R. Majewski, the Republican candidate for Congress in Ohio, who, essentially, as others have noted about this, just can't stop lying about his military record, which, is the kind of thing that becomes a problem when you're running for office. New report on what he's been doing since being exposed as probably having lied about his military record. So let's see, new details discovered by the reporters and new mistakes made by him along the way. Records contradict Majewski's account of military punishment, say Brian Slodisko. Yeah, maybe. Slow Disco is probably a good way of thinking of it. It's S-L-O, slow, D-Y-S-K-O, Slow Disco. So like a song, slow down the beat and close dancing and discos, I guess. And James Laporta. No Laporta joke immediately comes to mind, but okay. Anyway, they reported this yesterday for the AP. Republican J.R. Majewski, once again, featured in the illustrative photo in his Glenn Youngkin red fleece vest, and it's just not working for him, I guess. Majewski has centered his campaign for a competitive Ohio congressional seat around his biography as an Air Force veteran. But one of the big questions that has surfaced is why Majewski was told he could not re-enlist in the Air Force after his initial 4 years were up. And we heard that in the first report about that. I think the second follow-up report we read as my recollection is that it either said outright or intimated that that was not exactly correct, but they're back to that now, and I guess they're getting some answers about that. Majewski's campaign said last week that he was punished and demoted after getting in a, quote, brawl in an Air Force dormitory in 2001. Military records obtained since then by the Associated Press, however, offer a different account of the circumstances, which military legal experts say would have played a significant role in the decision to bar him from reenlisting. So what are they finding out?
Liar! Liar! Liar!
I guess that's true. So he says it was a brawl, but records say it was something else. They indicate, the records do, that Majewski's punishment and demotion were the result of him being stopped for driving drunk on a U.S. airbase in Japan in September of 2001. So that's against the rules. The documents, which were provided to the AP and independently authenticated, present yet another instance where the recorded history of Majewski's service diverges. Diverging is what they're doing.
Liar!
You can just you can get around to saying that, but it diverges from what he has told voters as he campaigns while using his veteran status as a leading credential, because he hasn't got any other ones, though he does have a fleece vest. In a statement, Majewski acknowledged that he was punished for drunken driving, so that seems true, though he didn't address why his campaign previously said his demotion was the result of a fight. And you really ought to explain that. This mistake, as he says, is now more than 20 years old. I'm sure we've all done something as young adults that we look back on and wonder, what was I thinking? And I'm sure our parents and grandparents share these sentiments, Majewski said. And that's good as far as it goes. Of course, you might say, I don't understand why you did the lying liar thing last week, though. What were you thinking last week when you lied about what you were thinking back in 2001? Since starting his campaign to unseat longtime Democratic Representative Marcy Kaptur, Majewski has repeatedly said he was a combat veteran who served a tour of duty under, quote, tough circumstances in Afghanistan. By his own account, he once went more than 40 days in the country, that would be Afghanistan presumably, without a shower due to a lack of running water. His story came under intense scrutiny last week when the AP, citing military documents obtained through public records requests, reported that he did not deploy to Afghanistan as he claimed, but instead spent 6 months based in Qatar, or Qatar, as is sometimes said, a longtime U.S. ally, where he helped load and unload aircraft, which is even more, that's actually a much more like rugged and military style description of what he did than what the actual records say. The records say he was a passenger transfer specialist or passenger something, that basically the job was that he would load and unload military passengers, medics, and occasionally supplies as well. Like loading and unloading aircraft makes it sound like I could have been putting missiles on there or giant bombs or tough military type things like, I don't know what, beard trimming kits or, eye patches for SEALs or something like that. And, but makes it sound like, but when you're talking about passengers, like basically you start thinking about flight attendants. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Watch out in Afghanistan. Bye-bye. That's not really as tough sounding as loading and unloading aircraft. But that's what you're doing. And who knows whether, my description of what he was really doing is any better than anyone else. I could be lying too. Oh, I'm not lying. I just talking out where's my bleed porn? You don't even need that. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the point is, it wasn't combat. The latest revelation that Majewski was demoted for drunken driving adds another wrinkle. Last week, the AP asked Majewski's campaign why his military service records showed that he was not allowed to re-enlist in the Air Force and left the service after 4 years at a rank that was one notch above where he started. That would be that would show some very poor performance. Ordinarily, you can count on two or more minor promotions from the lower ranks anyway, over the course of your, 4 years, is it, in your initial enlistment. At the time, his campaign said in an email that Majewski was, quote, in a fight in the dormitory with another service member, which, quote, knocked his rank down. His campaign added that he later gained some of that rank back. The personnel records obtained by the AP make no mention of a fight. Instead, they state that Majewski was demoted for drunken driving at Kadena, Kadena, Kadena Air Force Base, or Air Base, as they put it, in Japan on September 8th, 2001. And rather than gain his rank back, as Majewski's campaign said, the records indicated that he continued to hold the rank of E2, one notch above entry level, that he was demoted to for the rest of his active duty. So, yeah, I guess maybe the story probably is that he had gained 2 ranks, E1 being the basic, airman basic, E1, enlisted rank 1. And then he was promoted to E2, enlisted rank 2, and then it looks like he made it to E3, then got busted down to E2, and then stayed there. So it's not the case that he gained any rank back. I mean, he was net plus 1 rank from enlistment to discharge, but he didn't go, for instance, to E4, then get knocked down to E1, and then make it back to E2 or anything like that. He just got demoted and then got discharged. When you decided to get behind the wheel of a vehicle after indulging in intoxicating liquor, you brought discredit upon yourself, the 733rd or 733rd Air Mobility Squadron, and the Air Force. The disciplinary records state, referring to the unit Majewski was assigned to at the time. Further, misconduct by you of any type will not be tolerated. The 3-page document details Majewski's punishment, which included a reprimand and 30 days of extra duty in addition to the demotion. It bears Majewski's signature and shows he consulted a lawyer and waived his right to a court-martial. He also waived his right to appeal the punishment and requested that the document not become public, the records show. Okay, well, that'll be a bit of an open and shut case. I was thinking while I was reading it, I suppose it's possible that you could claim with that whole, further misbehavior, further misconduct by you of any type will not be tolerated. What if the situation was, sure, I got busted down for driving drunk. I acknowledge that. But I wasn't discharged. Then I got in a fight in a dormitory, and they said, remember that thing where we said that further misconduct by you of any type will not be tolerated? Yes. Well, we're not tolerating this fight. We're not going to bust you from E2 to E1 and give you another chance. We're going to just not allow you to re-up. We're going to discharge you at this point. Maybe your service was up in, let's say a couple of weeks from now. And rather than, we'll just say this, in exchange for your agreement to just leave the service, we won't court-martial you. We won't make any note on your record about this stupid fight, but it is the fight that convinces us that you should not be allowed to re-enlist. But if you just go quietly, we'll just leave the record as it stands today. Like, I could see a deal like that being cut and him saying, well, my takeaway from it was that the reason I wasn't able to re-enlist was this fight, but it wasn't the reason for my demotion. Of course, he also got it wrong that he gained back rank. So, unless who knows, maybe he told his campaign staff, yeah, I got in this fight and I had made it to E3 and I got busted all the way down to E1. They took away all my advancement, but in fact, that recollection is incorrect and he was busted down 1 rank to E2. And then when he told them that he was busted down to E1 and then they saw his discharge papers at E2, they assumed that he gained part of that back. I mean, I guess that would explain some of the mistakes being made. But of course, look, if you're going to run on your record as a veteran, you're going to want to check that paperwork and make sure you have everything right, and certainly not spend your time making central to your campaign the claim that you had combat veteran status in Afghanistan, if that was never the case. All right. There's still more. Basically, his commanding officer told him as long as he behaves himself for the next 6 months, he won't demote him all the way down to Airman Basic. Meyer said, this is the expert that they consulted about this. Did I not introduce him? I think I must have missed that paragraph. Let me jump back up. All right. I think I only stopped reading it. Further misconduct by you of any type will not be tolerated. Right. Here we are. The 3-page document details Majewski's punishment, which included the reprimand, right? The 30 days of extra duty, waived his right to appeal, right? No court martial, etc. The AP was not able to obtain a written presentation from Majewski, which was referred to, this is in quotes, a written presentation, which was referred to in the disciplinary paperwork, that he must have made some written presentation at some point, and that didn't come along with the rest of the documents that they got. The campaign did not respond to a request from the AP to provide that document. Here we are. Eric Meyer, a former West Point graduate and Army infantry officer, later turned military lawyer, reviewed Majewski's documents at AP's request. He said that the overall nature and quality of Majewski's military service can be severely questioned simply by virtue of the fact that he got out as an E2 after 4 years. And that's the point that most people have been making so far. Basically, his commanding officer told him as long as he behaves himself for the next 6 months, he won't demote him all the way down to Airman Basic, Meyer said, referring to the entry-level rank Majewski could have held if he got into more trouble. Meyer also noted that Majewski was given additional duties in his punishment that generally involve things like, the 30 days of extra duty. What sort of duty is it? Things like, quote, area beautification, unquote, and janitorial services. So picking up trash, basically, as opposed to combat experience in Afghanistan. Anyway, in some cases, a DUI can be a career-ending violation in the military, but 3 days after Majewski was pulled over, the U.S. was suddenly at war following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Within months, Majewski was reassigned and deployed to Qatar, which served as the staging ground for operations in Afghanistan, records show. Military records show Majewski's only deployment was to Qatar. Last Friday, during a defiant news conference, he insisted that he did indeed serve in Afghanistan, though he declined to offer specifics because he said the details were, quote, classified. Yeah, sure. But there is a difference between deploying to a country and touching down there. Remember that part of the description of his passenger facilitating, whatever, a specialist's job was that he would sometimes load passengers and medics and supplies onto a plane, then accompany the plane to its destination, and then facilitate the movement of the passengers, medics, and supplies off of that plane, much like a flight attendant might do, and then turning around and going home. So touching down in Afghanistan is not like deploying to Afghanistan. Majewski previously had said he was a combat veteran who deployed to Afghanistan, a term that conveys he received orders assigning him to a specific base in the country. I guess that would be the criteria upon which you would say someone was deployed to Afghanistan. Were you assigned to a base in the country? No, your base remained Qatar. You went home that night. And every night. Majewski previously said he could not discuss flights that he took to Afghanistan because they were classified. In his statement on Wednesday, he said he was aboard outbound transport flights to forward bases and combat zones throughout the Middle East, including Afghanistan, though he acknowledged that he was stationed in Qatar. He also described his experience joining the Air Force at age 20 as fulfilling yet challenging. Like any young serviceman away from family in a foreign land and with an assignment schedule in continual motion, it came with periods of difficulty and personal challenges, Majewski said. I lost my grandmother, who I loved very deeply, and it was tough work. I am proud of my service and the experiences that made me who I am today, but I have never once claimed to have undergone a tough combat tour in Afghanistan or suggested that I was engaged in active firefights. Majewski's campaign has previously promoted him as a combat veteran. During an August 2021 interview on the One American podcast, Majewski said that he had a tough time in life while serving a tour of duty in Afghanistan. He echoed that claim in other interviews unearthed by the liberal group Media Matters. Majewski's claim that he couldn't discuss his forays to Afghanistan because the details were, quote, classified, was a red flag to those who investigate cases of stolen valor. The number one trope that comes out of people when they are either fabricating a military record or, in this case, embellishing a record is they fall back to, it's classified, said Ed Caffrey, a former Air Force Master Sergeant who now investigates stolen valor cases and teaches journalism at Eastern New Mexico University. He added, there's no junior enlisted air transportation specialist who was doing something so secret that 20 years later it still needs to be classified. That's a pretty good point. Majewski's campaign declined to a request to put the AP in touch with those he served with who could vouch that he went to Afghanistan, but he has posted several pages of records to social media that he said back up his claims. It's getting worse, I think. Military experts consulted by the AP say the records prove no such thing. The AP stated that I had only been deployed to Qatar. My records show my deployment location as classified. In addition, they forgot my deployment to Camp Hialeah in Korea, which is now closed. Majewski said in one tweet, which contained two separate documents. One of the documents included in the tweet was a temporary duty assignment in early 2001 to South Korea, which are not orders to deploy, as Majewski claimed. Key details, including the purpose of the trip and its duration, were also blurred out in the photo Majewski posted. Additionally, the document's inclusion of the phrases top secret and secret were references to the security clearances held by Majewski and the non-commissioned officer he traveled with, Air Force experts say. That officer, whose name was redacted, had a top secret clearance. Majewski had a secret clearance. Members of the military typically need security clearances to do their jobs. The other document included in the tweet, which does not show a date, indicated Majewski had been medically cleared to go on a different temporary assignment to a classified location. Experts say such forms often list the service member's destination as classified as a matter of routine. The reason that it says classified is not because he's going to some top secret black ops location, Caffrey said. It says classified because that's a non-secured form. He's taking that form around with him to different places on base where people who put eyes on it may not have security clearances to see what he's doing. It's operations security. They don't want everyone and their brother to know where he's going. That's not something you want to put out to the general public, Caffrey added. Even as scrutiny of Majewski intensifies, he has given no indication that he intends to drop out of the race and has continued to campaign. I have nothing to hide, Majewski said at the end of a brief news conference on Friday. So how do you like that? That's where we stand now. We'll see whether this gets any worse for him, but there's not a whole lot of time for him to make it worse. The elections are about, 5 weeks away now? But that's an eternity in politics, of course, so he can always make things worse for himself. All right, let's see. What other things have we got to consider? Besides the fact that the break looms large, there are a few other stories. They'll all have to wait, I guess, until the other side of the break. Anything I can fit in super quickly? I can just tease, I think, what's coming up next. Let me do that with a return to the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage story, and I'll tease you with this by saying after the break, we'll read through Mark Sumner's piece which he put together for the front page at the Daily Kos. Once again, I'm forgetting my instructions. The Daily Kos. We don't say that, but then again, there's no we either, so they don't say that. And back in the day, we didn't say it either. They just say Daily Kos, and that's it. Anyway, maybe he'll have a little bit more organized insight into the question of whether or not sabotage is indeed ultimately suspected by, I guess, the world community at large, and better formulated reasons than we've been able to articulate so far on this show, even when we're reading other people's material, about why it is suspected that the Russians might have done this to themselves rather than been the victim of some sort of third-party activity in this sabotage. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up for now. I'm taking a break. I don't know whether there's any actual breaks programmed in, but maybe we'll curse up a storm while we're gone just to see what happens. All right, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, just looking around, casting about for other things that we need to keep an eye on here and whether or not we're missing anything, and almost assuredly that is the case. But of course, that's what we have the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy for, to make sure that we get a full news diet every day. That isn't coming up just yet. We have another half hour before we try to rush through his carefully prepared summaries about what's actually up for the show today. But that's just, well, I should say that's just one of the reasons that we have the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And the other is because justice freaking feels like it, okay? And it's an outlet for him, just as this show is an outlet for me, and 3 days a week for Greg as well. I think it's just a burden on Joan. I'm not sure. I think she enjoys coming by, but I don't know if it's as therapeutic, let's say, and certainly not so much at 7:30 in the morning as it used to be at 8:30 anyway. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Oh, yes, right. We were going to go to Mark Sumner's summation of what was going on out in the Baltic. Is that right? Okay. Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged, and the best suspect is the nation that sabotaged them before. Well, that's a good reason to come to that conclusion, right? This was his piece from yesterday. Mark Sumner writing on Monday, leaks were discovered in the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipelines. The gas within the 750-mile-long pipeline is boiling to the surface, and there have been warnings that this could represent a serious threat to efforts to reduce spills of greenhouse gases. However, the Danish Energy Agency, the other DEA, as we like to call them, just starting right now, reports that most of the gas is already depleted as the damaged pipelines fills with seawater. Okay. Almost immediately, U.S. intelligence agencies indicated that this was likely an act of sabotage. And I don't have the Beastie Boys sabotage handy, and I would have to pay for the performance anyway, but I can reference them for free, I think. Almost immediately, U.S. intelligence agencies indicated sabotage. On Tuesday, Sweden revealed that, and should we do it in Swedish accent? I don't think I can actually, I can only do the Muppet Swedish chef accent, really. But they revealed that seismographs in the area have detected This is terribly offensive, isn't it? A pair of disturbances that are now thought to be explosions. Although, to the Swedes, like the Norwegians, I notice, tend to be ready to be insulted. Norwegians, I love the great thing about the Norwegian accent. I think is always interesting. Is they, I guess their language, I guess, calls for this lilting up thing, which in English indicates a question. In a way, right? Is a subtle indication that you're asking a question. I don't know whether that's also the case in Norwegian and they just pitched the questions a little higher or whatever. But the Norwegians in their speech seem to always be asking questions in English. But that's not what they're actually doing. But I don't know. I guess the really skilled English speakers, you get taught that inflection change too. And then you can't tell what they're doing. But anyway, I don't know if the Swedes do that also. But it doesn't matter because why are we differentiating? We're poking fun at entire ethnic groups, and that's okay somehow because we're progressive. I don't know. So I guess the excuses aren't working. But I'm just trying to add some interest to the show by doing this. And we hope that as white Europeans, they're not too worried about being marginalized because of what I've been doing here. Okay. Well, at any rate, the Swedes did have some actual serious things to say. Their seismographs in the area had detected a pair of disturbances that are now thought to be explosions. This is very serious. We don't make jokes about this, right? The EU joined the US on Wednesday in calling what happened the result of a deliberate act. Naturally, the pro-Russian sources, including right-wing media in the United States, has a suspect. They are pushing a series of clips and statements suggesting that America did it. And certainly, it's entirely possible. It doesn't make a great deal of sense, I don't think, geopolitically, but maybe there's something I'm missing about it that will come out along with, if there is, in fact, any evidence that the United States did it. But it was very interesting to watch Republican or right-leaning media in the United States blame it on the United States in a way that was negative. Like, it's interesting because it's a new membership in the Blame America First crowd, I guess, as they used to say most liberals and progressives were. It's the sort of thing that, like, had Trump done it, they would have been cheering. Look how tough and strong we are, showing the Russians who's boss by sabotaging their pipeline. But, whatever. Partisan politics gets in the way, and it's an odd thing to watch. But the best suspect, Mark continues, for who took down Russia's gas pipeline to Europe is the same nation who constantly sabotaged that pipeline in the past, which is Russia. Which is weird because, it's basically for their benefit. They sell their natural gas that way. The pipeline, Nord Stream pipeline, is apparently owned by an international consortium of, gas companies. But 51% of the ownership, this part I actually looked up and know for you ahead of time. 51% of the ownership of the operating company, Nord Stream, is its own operating company, is 51% of the shares are owned by Gazprom, the Russian natural gas monopoly, I think. Anyway, so it's majority Russian owned, but only a bare majority, and the other 49% is parceled out among ownership groups in the rest of Europe, and mostly Western Europe at that. So it's an interesting mix. Anyway, the best suspect for who did this, the people who did it last time, Russia. At this point, he has embedded a Julia Davis tweet with a video clip in it, which reads, "Meanwhile, in Russia, every state TV program is feasting on Tucker Carlson's accusations," the one I played you the other day, that the Biden administration is somehow involved in causing the Nord Stream damage. Military experts loved Tucker's idea about cutting undersea internet cables and said, sure, why not? And we are invited to watch it here, but I'll invite you to watch it on your own. You can. We heard the clip. It might be interesting to hear people in Russian responding, except you won't know what they're saying unless you're a Russian speaker. And the only way I can tell you what they're saying is the subtitles that are provided. But you might as well watch that for yourself, because then I would have to read them to you anyway. You get the idea. Mark, please continue. As CNN reports, the U.S. had actually warned European allies back in June that U.S. intelligence had determined that there was a threat of attack against the pipelines. Of course, for the America is always guilty crowd, this is just another example of genuine double naught spy twistiness. Double O, right? Double naught. Gotcha. Then there's the clip of President Joe Biden proclaiming that should Russia invade Ukraine, they did, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. I promise you we'll be able to do it. Okay. This clip is all over right-wing Twitter alongside claims that it is Biden's confession to sabotaging the pipelines, complete with lots of exclamation points, which again, I mean, if Trump had said it and then done it, it would have been doubly good, right? Trump is being tough, threatening their Nord Stream 2 pipeline if they invade Ukraine, and then if they do invade Ukraine, he's going to carry it out. So, I mean, while it might in the end mean, well, what if we really did do it? That would, of course, mean that some of these right-wing critics and even Tucker Carlson is correct about who did it, although it wouldn't be particularly wise for him to be giving suggestions to the Russians about how to retaliate. We might want to leave that up to them, though that's probably where they would have landed anyway, so because it won't make much of a difference in that respect. But still, why isn't that a tremendous applause line here in the United States? I'm not really sure. Well, anyway, and Twitter, Mark continues, Twitter is right. Biden did have an insidious way of bringing Russia's multi-billion-dollar pipeline project to a halt. He used diplomacy. Back on February 22nd, as the U.S. issued fresh warnings and Russian tanks gathered on the border, Germany suspended the completion of Nord Stream 2. The next day, Germany halted all construction. In May, a month before the U.S. issued its warning to European allies, including Germany, NBC News noted that the pipeline was unused and abandoned. Industry analysts reported that they never expected the pipeline to be commissioned, and senior officials noted that there was no other use anticipated. President Biden declared there would be no Nord Stream 2, and there was no Nord Stream 2. Not a single bomb was required. So that's the case against the United States. They warned that the pipelines were vulnerable, and Biden said Nord Stream 2 would be gone if Russia invaded. Oh, and a Polish politician that not one of them had ever heard of before Tuesday made a joke. That's certainly impressive evidence. I did hear about that yesterday, and maybe you did as well. Silly as this may sound, jackasses like Tucker Carlson are trying to parlay this into a serious case against the United States, and in particular, into a claim that Biden has taken us down the path to, of course, inevitable nuclear holocaust. Because no right-wing conspiracy is complete without a good apocalypse. Capping all this off might be the message that Donald Trump ran with on Wednesday morning on his failing social media platform. After repeating the Biden statement about Nord Stream 2, Trump heavily hinted that the United States was behind the sabotage, talked up a, quote, major escalation to World War III, and offered his services to, quote, head up negotiations between Russia and Ukraine so all this stuff could be wrapped up. Yes, really, that Trump tried to stop the pipeline from being built is apparently all forgotten now. However, there's a much better suspect for who might have wanted to take out the two pipelines. Not surprisingly, it's the same nation that Carlson spends the majority of his video absolving of any possibility of having done it. It's Russia. Why would Russia be a good candidate for taking down its own pipeline? Because they've done it before. In May, Russia blamed technical issues for an outage on the pipeline that lasted for a week. In June, a reported turbine failure dropped gas through the pipeline by 75%. There has long been a period of annual maintenance on the pipeline. However, this year, Russia declared a second unscheduled outage that was directly connected to the efforts of Germany and others to cut their dependence on Russian gas. That took the pipeline down for another 10 days in July. Then, in August, Russia shut down the pipeline again, just as European countries were beginning to fill the storage facilities they would need for the winter. It has not operated at over 20% capacity since then, due to what Russia claimed was faulty equipment. Russia also claimed they had hired German engineering firm Siemens to fix the problem. Siemens denied knowing anything about it. Sounds very Trumpian. At the beginning of September, the pipeline was completely offline again. There was no doubt about why Russia did this. Russian media and pro-Russian social media spent weeks rubbing their hands over the thoughts of Germans and Poles, quote, freezing in the dark without their previous Russian gas. Russian television openly speculated on how this would crash Germany's economy, bring an end to the German auto industry, and most of all, cause Europeans to regret ever having backed Ukraine in combating Russia's illegal invasion. Only when it got around to the start of September did German Chancellor Olaf Scholz say that while supplies of gas might get tight, it looked as if Germany would make it through the winter just fine without Russian gas. Scholz was just one of many European leaders who followed up by saying that they would make it fine without Russia. EU Economic Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, Paolo Gentiloni said that the whole of Europe was, quote, well, we use a stereotypical and ethnically insulting Italian accent, and we say, well prepared to resist Russia's extreme use of the gas weapon. That would be terrible to do. We can't do that to poor Paolo Gentiloni. And besides which, who knows? Maybe he's Swiss, but he would be speaking Italian. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, poor old Paolo Gentiloni actually said in very businesslike fashion that Europe, the whole of Europe, was well prepared to resist Russia's extreme use of the gas weapon. It's not what you're thinking. All right. Anyway, and all that was before the new Baltic pipeline bringing gas from Norway and Denmark to Eastern Europe opened this month. So how do you like that? And by the way, that sets up for the popular television series on Netflix that I've been telling everybody they should watch, Occupied, which became very scary, particularly in light of the invasion of Ukraine. Anyway, Nord Stream 2 never operated. By the first week of September, it was clear that despite Russia's many attempts to cripple European nations and manipulate market prices by withholding gas, it had played all its cards. Nord Stream 1 was worthless. On September 4th, Russia actually shut down the pipeline indefinitely. So who cares if you blow it up at that point? How much money was Russia making from these pipelines? Nothing. How much leverage did it give them over Europe? None. On the other hand, by destroying the pipeline, Russia is back at the center of right-wing media in the U.S., has ramped up talk of nuclear destruction, and has Donald Trump arguing for a mediated settlement with Ukraine, which now means that 100% of the Republican Party will find itself calling for negotiations with Ukraine in roughly 10 seconds. Nord Stream 2 was never going to pump a foot of gas. Nord Stream 1's value had diminished to where it was never going to have real value again, even if the war ended today. Or you can believe Russia, and it was so decrepit that they couldn't keep it operating anyway. What it comes down to is simply this: the only nation that might potentially gain from blowing up these pipelines is the one most likely to exploit it for both casus belli and belli, I guess, and for one last poke to bring up the price of gas, or the insurance money, which, you should think about as well. And European leaders seem to get that. Here is a quote. This is grabbed from the Globe and Mail, the Canadian paper. European Union leaders said the apparent attack on two key pipelines in the Baltic Sea showed that the energy conflict between Russia and Europe had entered a potentially dangerous phase, and vowed retaliation if evidence emerges that the Kremlin was behind what they believe was an unprecedented act of sabotage. They have little doubt about who actually pressed this button. And this taken from the Washington Post reporting on it. 5 European officials with direct knowledge of security discussions said there was widespread assumption that Russia was behind the incident. Only Russia had the motivation, the submersible equipment, and the capability, several of them said, though they cautioned that they did not yet have direct evidence of Russia's involvement. That direct evidence is very likely, Mark says, to be found. It just hasn't been yet. Okay. So that wraps up the article. It gives us a lot to think about that particular development as news breaks around it. And we'll be able to evaluate the story with that in mind. Okay, let's see. Got some other things to share with you, following up on a story we haven't reported on in some time, but we'll take the opportunity because it involves somebody with a funny name. Corey Lewandowski cuts a deal on a charge stemming from an alleged unwanted sexual advance, or from several, I guess, or at least several instances of alleged unwanted sexual advances, not advantages, but advances. And I'm thinking already about explaining myself here. Corey Lewandowski isn't the funny name involved here. Do you remember that this was the case? I mean, it certainly rings a bell that he was being charged with some sort of unwanted sexual advances, but by several people, it seems like, would have the opportunity to bring those charges. I had forgotten about this, but I remembered once we saw who the complainant was here. Corey Lewandowski, who was Donald Trump's first campaign manager, allegedly touched a woman repeatedly at a Las Vegas charity dinner in 2021. Oh yes, sounds vaguely familiar. Well, Alex Eisenstadt is reporting this for Politico, and now it all comes flooding back as we read it. Former senior Donald Trump advisor Corey Lewandowski has cut a deal with Las Vegas prosecutors after he was charged with misdemeanor battery stemming from allegations of unwanted sexual advances toward a woman during a charity dinner in September of 2021. The charge came nearly a year after, remember this name, Trashelle Odom. You remember? I do. And I remember being astonished that anybody would name their children Trashelle, which I guess is Trashelle like Michelle, but it's still spelled Trashelle. And I just can't believe you would do that to a kid. But okay. The charge came nearly a year after Trashelle Odom accused Lewandowski of repeatedly touching her, including on her leg and buttocks, and speaking to her in sexually graphic terms. Politico reported that Odom, the wife of Idaho construction executive and major GOP donor John Odom, also alleged that Lewandowski stalked her through the hotel where the event took place, told her she had a, quote, nice ass, and threw a drink at her. That's that's just flirty, nice ass. Psh, splat. I don't know. There's people for whom that's like actual, flirting. There's, pickup artist weirdos who believe that that's going to work somehow, or just psychos who just don't know how to interact with anyone, least of all, those that they're trying to impress somehow when sex is involved, or they wish sex was involved. Anyhow, the charge was filed earlier this month in Clark County. I'm going to go check the date on this piece here. No, it's current. That's interesting. The charge was filed earlier this month in Clark County, Nevada, according to court records. The records show that Lewandowski agreed to a deal that will see him undergo 8 hours of impulse control counseling, serve 50 hours of community service, and stay out of trouble for a year. I have a feeling that the deal will actually see him not stay out of trouble for a year, but at any rate, that's the terms of the deal. He also paid a $1,000 fine. Under the agreement, Lewandowski did not have to admit guilt, and once the conditions are met, the charges will be dismissed. A misdemeanor case was filed, but we are pleased to say that the matter has been resolved. The resolution did not require any admissions by Mr. Lewandowski. The court set conditions that Mr. Lewandowski will fulfill, and the case will ultimately be dismissed. Lewandowski's lawyers, David Chesnoff and Richard Schoenfeld, said in a statement. An attorney for Odom did not respond to a request for comment. Lewandowski was Trump's first campaign manager and remained a key informal advisor during Trump's time in the White House, and he remained part of Trump's inner circle of political advisors after the former president lost re-election. But Lewandowski was quickly fired from his position running Trump's super PAC, and he was also let go from consulting roles with other Republican politicians, including South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem and then Nebraska gubernatorial candidate Charles Herbster. Trump's spokesperson said at the time that Lewandowski, quote, will no longer be associated with Trump world, except he is, while Noem's spokesperson said Lewandowski will not be advising the governor in regard to the campaign or official office. Ooh, official office. Wow. Okay. But Lewandowski soon worked his way back into Republican politics in 2022. Lewandowski was seen with Noem at a Republican Governors Association event in May, Politico reported, and he signed on to consult for GOP hopefuls this year, including Ohio Senate candidate Jane Timken and Massachusetts gubernatorial hopeful Jeff Deal. I don't think either of them made it past the primary. Lewandowski also attended the Mar-a-Lago premiere of a film espousing election conspiracy theories in April. So not much in the way. That's why I don't think he'll really fulfill the terms of the court agreement, but I don't know that they'll care that much. Odom was one of about 24 major Republican donors who attended a September 2021 charity dinner at the Westgate Las Vegas Resort and Casino's Benihana restaurant. Odom, who was seated next to Lewandowski during the dinner, alleged that Lewandowski spoke about his genitalia, because that's what you do, and sexual performance, and showed her his hotel room key. Odom's husband was not present at the time. Odom said that Lewandowski touched her around 10 times and that she repeatedly rebuffed him. You remember this, don't you? After leaving the dinner, she said that Lewandowski followed her, threw a drink at her, and called her stupid. She also said that Lewandowski tried to intimidate her, saying he was, quote, very powerful and could, quote, destroy anyone or get himself charged with crimes in Nevada. At an after-dinner party, witnesses said they observed Lewandowski following Odom around the bar area, while some people present tried to shield her from him. One person recalled seeing Odom in tears. Those who were present for the dinner described Lewandowski as appearing intoxicated. Lewandowski was also charged with battery in 2016, if you remember this incident instead. You might confuse the two. After yanking the arm of a reporter, Michelle Fields, not Trishelle, but Michelle Fields, at a Trump campaign event. The charges were later dropped, but Lewandowski, who at the time was serving as Trump's campaign manager, claimed the incident never happened before video emerged confirming that it did. He's a real gem. Okay, so now you're up to speed on what's been going on with him. It's very near our time to say goodbye to all our company. But let's see. Perhaps we'll sneak in one more quick story. We'll see whether they're lying about how long it takes to read. They estimated it at 2 minutes. I don't believe it. I usually take 10 to read anything. But this from down in Texas in Uvalde. You all remember, of course, that's the scene of our latest gigantic, tragic school shooting. Uvalde parents demand an investigation into the resource officers who responded to the shooting there. And I guess you could put that in quotes, responding to the shooting. Not the actually literally hundreds of law enforcement agents that eventually replied to the call, but the school had resource officers. Like, you know how they keep saying we'll have an armed resource officer at every one of these schools. And at no point have any resource officers ever actually been effective in stopping a school shooting. They've responded, some better, some worse. And these guys, I guess, apparently among the worst so far. But the parents want some answers, and they're having difficulty getting them, and local politicians having difficulty providing them, and still remaining, Republican and pro-gun and all of this. It's been 4 months, reports the Texas newsroom here. What are we talking about? KUT 90.5, Austin's NPR station has the banner for this one. Sergio Martinez Beltran doing the reporting. I'm not going to be able to get through all of it, but just to give you a flavor of what's going on here, it's been 4 months since a shooter entered Uvalde's Robb Elementary School and killed 19 kids and 2 teachers. Since then, the Texas Department of Public Safety The U.S. Department of Justice, a Texas House committee, and the Uvalde District Attorney have launched investigations into law enforcement's response. But the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District, UCISD, right? Uvalde CISD, has yet to investigate how the district's school resource officers responded to the attack. That would seem to be rather important, I think, and it's certainly important to the parents. Yesterday, it was 18 weeks since the shooting, and the school district has done absolutely nothing. Brett Cross, the father of the 10-year-old victim, Uzziah Garcia, told the Texas newsroom on Wednesday, they haven't checked into the officers. It's likely they don't care. And I can see, like, all the focus was on the paralyzed law enforcement that waited in the hallway for so long before they even tried looking for the keys, etc. But yeah, that's true. There hasn't been much explanation of what happened to the school resource officers who were on site with guns. And is that the reason why the governments don't want to look into it? Is it undoes the myth about that, and that having the armed officers there will be helpful? No one really knows. Anyway, this prompted Cross, a group of parents and some community members, to protest outside the school's district headquarters. As of 1 p.m. on Wednesday, then ongoing demonstrations had surpassed the 28-hour mark. They're demanding accountability and an investigation into the UCISD school resource officers. The parents are also asking that the officers be suspended until an investigation is concluded. What happened to listening to the voices of the parents? Isn't that the most important thing? Doesn't Greg Abbott have a red fleece vest? Doesn't he know that he should be listening to how they want their schools run?
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
I don't know. Apparently not. Well, I thought we would start the show with a school protest up here in Virginia and end with a school protest down in Texas. That was never my plan, but it will work. Stay tuned now for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. He has an actual plan. He usually sticks to it. Would I tell you what that plan is? I wouldn't want to ruin the surprise. Stay tuned.